Good morning and welcome to lecture 10. The reason I'm doing this a little bit differently is because we will be running through different apps on my computer, and rather than use my iPad to create this video, which I typically do, I figured I'd use my laptop so that I can browse between different apps that you're likely to use for the purpose of learning what you will. Okay. Now, today's lecture is based on chapter 10. That's why it's labeled lecture 10. It's the first module of first section of your third module. And this lecture deals with notes, data, and bibliography. Our summary so far, if we have gotten so far into the data collection stage, we have done a few different things. We have focused the problem. We have identified and defined the basic concepts involved. We have selected variables that relate to each of the concepts that we are studying. We have found a way to measure each of the variables. We have chosen a research design that provides the desired information or potentially will provide the desired information between the two variables. Now, obviously, remember that if it is qualitative research, you may have a research design that attempts to uncover variables because the objective is quite different in qualitative research sometimes. Obviously, a qualitative process may not make a decision on a sampling procedure, but a quantitative research method, you would have found a sampling procedure. And before you actually draw the sample, this should actually precede this because you have to be aware of all ethical considerations involved in the research, and hopefully uh, your method of sampling and the way you recruit participants has been approved by RAB. And then, of course, you draw the sample. While collecting data, there are several important things. Detail is always important because as we collect data, we know what we are observing and looking for as it should have been predefined. But as we continue to collect, we still have to be attentive to small nuances and changes, and so that we can, collect the right kind of data or select or reject data sets that we receive. Storing data requires that we keep them available for us to go back and follow, but also to have transparency so that others can see that it's not fraudulent, it is actually genuine research work. There are different ways to store notes, references, and data itself. Okay. Before we go into how you'd store each one of them, the question is, why should we store them? And perhaps I answered this a couple sentences ago. One reason is obviously to go back and refer for the researchers to return for reference. The second thing is accountability. So that if in question, the research can be documented and demonstrated that it did occur a certain way. That's why you'd store data. There are different ways to store research data and research experiments of findings. It is recommended that we maintain data in a research journal. A research journal is often also referred to in the sciences as a lab notebook. Pre this intensive technology that we have now, and even now in several places where it's not feasible to store data on a computer, as you might be working with toxic substances or chemicals and you don't want to contaminate your laptop. Data is often held in notebooks or research journals. These research journals have stitched bindings. they have numbered pages. They have several other features. This is described in your the section of the module as well. The idea is that if data sheets or pages are removed or manipulated, it becomes easier to trace. And this is again going back to accountability and reliability. So research journals tend to be in a physical form of that nature. Often your experiments or procedures or findings are recorded in them, and the idea is to have them in that kind of a notebook, perhaps in a closed cabinet or locked cabinet with limited access so that it can't be tampered and messed around. Data can be stored electronically too. So data, other than the physical journal, can be stored in files. It can be stored in Word or Excel sheets, and it is recommended that you password protect. This helps data from being manipulated or tampered by other sources with competing interests against the researcher. Oftentimes, even between researchers in a group, when it is protected that way, it's limited as to who can access it. When storing data electronically, you can have individual files on a laptop that's also password protected, but oftentimes data electronically is stored on what's considered a shared drive. So larger research groups will have a shared drive from Google or other providers. Who may share a lot of different files, but there might be some files which are only available to one or two of the researchers and so on. So basically, you can store them securely in different ways. Storing data, the title should have also said references, is about storing your references as well and maintaining a bibliography. If you don't remember what a bibliography is, we'll just point that out in a second. So I'm going to clear all my scribbles. Oh, there we go. Oh, well. So when we look at a research paper, this is the example of a research paper. As you scroll down to the very end, as we scroll down to the very end, what we find then is we see what we see as references. And it's a list of all the articles. And that's essentially what a bibliography is. Now, there are many ways to generate or write bibliographies. I'm still trying to get rid of all of these scribbled and a little unsuccessful, so bear with me while I we will pretend it doesn't exist because we can still see the writing quite clearly. Bibliographies often have several styles of being represented. So this is from your example from your textbook as to how you write a bibliography for a single book, or for an article, or for a chapter in a in a book or in an edited book and so on. Remember that when we write bibliographies, there are several styles. This style that we see here is representative of a style called an APA, or American Psychological Association. There are other styles, MDPI, Chicago, Nature, and so on. Now, all styles have a different requirement in terms of how text is, how papers are cited in the text, and how they're organized as bibliographies at the very end. Rather than manually write down each bibliography, it's often better to actually try to use a bibliographic management software. Typically, that software looks looks a little bit like this. So what we have here, this is called Mendeley. This is EndNote. Mendeley, and the third one is called Zotero. Both Mendeley and Zotero are completely free. EndNote is a purchase subscription, but most universities, what they tend to do is they will have a subscription that's offered to students quite readily. Okay. Now, this is an image from your textbook. This is considered a note card. A note card is a piece of paper or a card which has space in quotes for direct quotations as you're interviewing people or observing people saying stuff as part of your research process. So you can write the direct quotes there, and it also has room for paraphrasing or summaries. Okay. Data collection sheets also allow for compilation of a lot of these quotations and sometimes summarizing of quantitative data that you pick up from different sources. Now, what I want to do right now is we've spoken a little bit about Mendeley, EndNote, and Zotero. I want to talk to you about the importance of having these kind of software in research, because what happens is often we end up writing stuff and then having to essentially type in all the references manually. Okay, so the best way really to not have to do it, and I'm going to share my screen now, is to actually use Mendeley. So Mendeley looks, as you can see perhaps on my screen. I'm just going to go ahead and cancel this. Okay, very good. So if you look at my screen, I'm circling what Mendeley looks like. Now, what you can do with Mendeley is if you double click on it, the database opens up. It does a little bit of an update while it's picking up all your references from the server. And again, I apologize for all the scribbles on the side. This is not going to take away from what you need to see. So I'm not going to worry too much about why those scribbles have stayed despite my best efforts to get rid of them. So what you can see in Mendeley is you can see that I have, this is my personal app. So you can see that I've organized all my references as different topics on the left-hand side. So there's aging and oxidation, there's aging of cardiovascular system, there's something about berries, curcumin, EGCG, epidemiology, and so on. At the bottom, it's doing its update. I'm just going to let it do what it's doing. Okay. So while it's doing that, this is what any of your referencing databases are going to do. So I'm just going to open a Microsoft Word document so that you see why these pieces of software are so useful. So I'm just going to copy paste something from this paper that I showed you earlier as when talking about bibliographies. I'll just copy this paragraph. And as I paste it here, now it's assumed the format of the initial document I copied it from. Let's see if we can copy this a different way. Let's say paste special and as unformatted text, and it sets it up differently. Anyway, now as we go through this document, let's pretend that we're typing this document, and I wish to insert a reference here, a reference that I've used. So the first thing I need to do is when I go to my Microsoft Office, is I go to references. And then if you notice on references, because when one wants to use Mendeley or Zotero, they have to create an account. So if you create your Mendeley account, it'll give you an option to install Mendeley within your word processor, your Microsoft Word document. And as you can see, that's my Mendeley bibliographic management software. Now, so anyway, I decide to use this. So I have gone into the sentence end of the sentence. I'm going to insert my reference. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and say insert citation. And just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and pick a name. And it pulls up this list from all the citations that I have. And let's pretend that this is the citation I wanted. I go ahead and click on it. And I go and say, OK. So it goes ahead and formats the citation. Let's do it a few more times. Let's say I have a different citation here. I go and hit insert, and I'm just going to pick a different name. And I say OK, and it goes ahead, puts a different citation in. Let's put a third one. Well, let's do two for now. And let's pretend that this is the end of our document. So we go ahead and say references. And we can go ahead and make that bold. Now, we've inserted two in-text citations using Mendeley. Now, obviously, that means in the references section, we have to type the whole thing out. But instead of typing, because we have Mendeley, we just go and say insert bibliography. And lo and behold, both the references are there instantly in the right format. Just for fun, let's add a third reference here and see what it does to the other two references. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick someone's name that starts with an A. And the reason I'm going to pick someone's an or let's say with B. And if you noticed what happened below is that the reference that started with the name B positioned itself above the other two references, which the author's last name starts with a K or with a V. Okay. So what it has done is not only has it inserted the reference in text, but in your bibliography, it's put that in the correct order because for APA, all your references are arranged in an alphabetical manner. Now you can keep adding references to your text, and your bibliography will keep updating, putting all the references in exactly the right format. And that's a wonderful thing about bibliographic software, and which is why it's recommended that you take some time uh, to go through YouTube videos or videos that these software websites provide. So if you want to know how to go to Mendeley, all you do is go to your browser and click www.mendeley.com. Well, that's for the app itself, but we don't need to go to the news feed, so we get rid of that. Go again. Oh, well, it brings me back to the newsfeed. It probably has some old cookies stuck here, but you know what? Let's just Google for Mendeley. And there we go. That's the actual site. Up. Okay, so that's the Mendeley site. One of the things that you have to do when you use Mendeley is you have to go ahead and create an account. If you do not create an account, I'm going to change the color here so we don't confuse what we're seeing with any of the new scribbles that I make. So you have to create an account. Once you create an account, you can store stuff. And once you have the app, so you got to do a download as well to get the app. And once you do the app, you can store all your references in there, and you can create a link to be able to insert all of those references into the document that you're typing. So that's why it's really, really useful. The other cool feature is because you have so many different methods to reference, and depending on what journal you're sending your work to, you may have to reference a different way. Rather than you having to learn 100 different ways to refer, if you are using a software such as Mendeley or Zotero or EndNote, you can switch from one form to other very simply. All you do is go ahead and highlight a reference, any one, it doesn't even matter which one. And then you change. For example, I'm switching from APA, which I had, to modern language 8 or nature. Let's switch to nature, it's quite different. The moment I switch to nature, watch what happens to all my references. My references have now become numerical. And that's my third reference right here, okay? It changes format. Look at what happened to how they are represented. So the way they're cited changes as well. So there are lots of arguments to actually go ahead and get yourself familiarized with bibliographic software, as it makes life a lot easier for you. What I'd suggest at this point is, since it's a really small chapter, small section, the focus is more on the activity and the exercises that you should do to learn. So definitely go ahead and complete the assignments in the section of the module, answer all the questions in the back, and take some time to practice. This is going to be helpful throughout your academic career or otherwise, just knowing how to be able to use citation software. Mendeley has several cool features, and rather than make it a lecture about Mendeley, I'll simply say that When you store all your references here, you can go to any section and it pulls up all the papers. What you can also Mendeley will let you do is it'll let you store the entire manuscript, the paper itself. So you have the paper accessible to you. You can highlight different sections and make notes. You know, so I'm just typing random stuff. Well, the point is you can make notes and it will save the notes. And then when you see this little squiggle here, little box here, dialog box. So whenever you go back, you can see why you highlighted it. It refreshes your memory. It's very, very useful. Very useful. Again, I'm going to unsave this because this is not necessary for me anymore. Delete this note, yes. And yep, so that's pretty much it. Work through the chapter, work through all the questions in the back, go through the exercises. And that's all I have for today. We will see you at lecture 11 and have yourself a wonderful day.